Let me see what it gives me here. Okay,
Oh,
I
okay.
guess it's
Okay,
recording.
good.
So this is the beginning of our future of text office hours for October 25th.
And I unfortunately can only be here for, oh, no, wow. I need to jump in 5 minutes. Okay, so I won't be able to contribute too much, but I do want to respond via email to what your prompt, Adam, if you want to just bring it to the team or the recording. I think it's it was an excellent framing.
Which one?
I can pull it up just a moment.
The reframing of your thing about pain points?
Yes. Yeah, like you portrayed it as what are features of text, or what are problems that aren't being addressed in text that aren't fundamentally attached to the technology, so the distinction between the future of text versus the future of the technologies of text, something along those lines.
Yep.
Is an excellent, pretty deep well. And we oftentimes, I think, not only conflate the two, but focus on the technology side because it's easier to talk about. So if that's an appropriate or kind of a loose framing of how you presented it, do you have any leads on that approach?
There are so many directions to go.
Yeah, exactly.
From that question. Many of the things I've been thinking for the last half a year is about the actual display of text that there are so much heritage from the typewriter that has worked.
Yes.
And early computer implementation of the long sequence of characters coming from but in a way, even typewriters have more fidelity than what we get with regular computer text, because with the typewriter you could go slightly off character and write something again over, and you had some creative possibilities. So even though it was very grid based or type based, but there are many. Why can't text be curved? Why do they follow very straight lines, horizontal lines mostly? There are many, and these are just basic things on how we represent the past.
That goes back to Gutenberg.
Yeah, and even that is quite limited how we view symbols.
So I have to go in literally a minute. So
yeah,
Peter, I'm going to jump ahead of you just for a second to drop this prompt. That got me thinking what your question was, and so. Kind of along the same lines, there's so many different directions it can go. And so even getting a little meta about that, I think maybe that's part of the problem, is that we're in a kind of an unbundling of what the act of reading and writing is. We may find, may not, but we may find that actually it becomes a lot easier to talk about this when we come up with new words for, what is the act of reading and writing together, or what is the act of writing in a very transactional way, be it for writing a receipt or writing a text message, and then the kind of conventional sense of writing in all the internal processes, and maybe that has a different kind of name and a different relationship to the page, right? So, well, I don't want to get caught up in creating all these new unnecessary classifications. It makes me wonder if we had something like that, then it would be easier to talk about the where are those trajectories? What parts, what is the technology of that of the transactional future of text, Anyway, I'd love to go more into that. Fortunately, I have to drop. Peter,
but we have more office hours. Great to hear your thoughts here, Alan, and we'll continue this for sure.
Fantastic. See you all.
Have a good day, Alan. See you
Bye,
Friday.
Alan.
Yes, I wanted to ask if you two had ever seen David Small's work at the MIT Media Lab.
Looking for it right now. David Small.
What was it about?
He did some interesting three-dimensional text visualizations and animations. But then after
No,
he graduated, the research line seemed to peter out, as often happens.
Do you know the name of one of the projects? I can see one called Kaleido.
Hang on, let me see if I can find something. Let me just throw open Chrome and take a quick poke around.
Kaleido proposes a new interface that enables a user-defined conceptual, visual, spatial representation of computation that complements the traditional text-based perspective. Kaleido is a tool designed to help visual thinkers program, and users can use Kaleido to create personally meaningful visuals for their code. I don't think this is it, but it sounds interesting.
Yeah, that's more work. That's the right person.
www.independent-center.
Sorry about that. I should have muted announcements before we went online. Let's see, do not disturb. That's better. Okay. Now I was looking at his earlier work back in his student days. Although that project looks interesting.
I just stumbled on another one that looks interesting as well. It's reading through a closed book. Terahertz time-gated spectral imaging for content extraction through layered structures. They scan a closed book, basically.
Please drop some links, because I want to read that later on. If you, unless I can't find it.
Let me see if I can copy this and paste on chat.
Let's see, I think I might have a link.
This is the reading through a closed book one. Very interesting.
Yeah, I think that's the reference now that I dropped in.
Okay, ResearchGate. Temporal typography.
Hello there, Mark.
Hello. So I had to run some errands. I got Vistona Station. Just a bit more balance there.
You missed Frode calling from the plane.
Yeah, I sort of, I think that's above and beyond. I was thinking when he said it was on the plane, I thought, I used to love that. If I was flying out to the States, that meant I get sort of 7 hours where I could actually do some work without the bloody phone ringing.
I miss when I was in college, I had to take either buses or the subway, the metro to go, and it was a downtime that I managed to read so much during that downtime that you have nothing to do. You have to sit and wait to arrive, and there's like nothing to actually do. So it was like one of the most the moments that I read the most in my life, and it's the moment that I managed to solve the Rubik's Cube as well.
I just noticed Peter has his hand up. Is that from before, or are you waiting patiently?
He was
Peter.
talking about 3D typography.
I was referencing the work of David Small at the MIT Media Lab from back in the day. And then I'm trying to find a current link to the work, and I'm having a hard time finding anything dating back to the period that I was referring to. One of the problems with searching.
So we're having a few different threads started here. Alan dropped by for a few minutes and dropping some deep questions, and then he disappeared. And Frode joined in to say hello from. He was actually going to land. Was that correct?
Yeah, he's off to sunny Cyprus. It'd be nice at the moment.
So what we started with and what Frode was interested in was a discussion about kind of highlighting or coloring and highlighting text. And to me, that these are a few different discussions, I think. kind of using highlighting for overview material for like the timelines or to separate different categories, and then we have highlighting inside text, inside documents, and I think they have very different characters, those two use cases. I was going to write a long email about how I don't want highlighting inside documents. But then I didn't send it because it sounded too grumpy. But I think there is a risk of highlight if we start highlighting too much inside documents when we're not scanning. One thing is if you really want to scan large amount of documents, then it may be useful. But if we want to read, I think there is a great danger of actually breaking up sentences and highlighting entities like people and concepts, and not kind of fading away verbs and actual real sentences, because what I don't need more of is scanning text. I need a way to actually do deep reading and thinking about reading what the author says and thinking deeply. And on paper, it's much more easy for me, but on the screen, I jump and scan like everyone else. So I want more affordances to actually do deep reading, and I think that's far more missing than actually doing more searching, scanning, finding, jumping around, even though those things can be useful in many cases, or in some cases. So that's my image.
That certainly chimes. I mean, a sort of constant, well, something that's actually in a sense got probably worse in recent years rather than better. And I think because of this sort of whole cloud and everything everywhere thing, is that it's really ramped up our sense of our time being far too valuable to spend on anything except, well, there's problems. People tell you that this is taking too long, and then you never find out what it is they're doing all the time they've recovered. And one of the things we're not doing is we're not considering things. So I had the same sense that the coloring's a nice thing, but you don't actually want to make it too easy. It should be something where you consider why you're doing it. For instance, you don't want to give everything a color. It should be a way that to help you do the deeper part that you're just referring to. The other way takes us down the path of, oh, the computer will decide, because magically, if we throw enough crap at it, something magic will happen. And it does to a degree. But I think our desire there always outstrips the technology at the moment.
And to me, seeing a highlight immediately de-emphasizes everything else. So I get almost blind. I can't read the text around it. Of course, you can do it a weaker form where you have a very light coloration or a light highlighting of things. But I wonder what the alternatives there. You could imagine that the margins are used for that kind of coloration, that you don't color or highlight on the original text, but make some sort of margin.
I like the idea of having different view modes, precisely because of what you're saying. It is distracting to have all sorts of different either notes or highlights or those little reference numbers. So with view modes, you can choose how you want to experience based on what you need to do. So let's say, for example, a view mode can be highlight all of the names of people that show up, and then you're scanning to find people's names, right? Or maybe you want to you have a view mode for dates, and then all of the dates show up. They show up in a different color. Maybe you can even do to show the highlights with annotations, and then that's another view mode. Then if we're able to configure based on what we need, then it won't impact us. But we always fall down on the question of how many settings and functionalities that we can choose to have, because those add complexities. And a lot of the UI and UX things that I've been reading, they're against having too many options, because either users never find out that those things exist in the settings, that they can do those things, so then they end up not using them. And there's also the question of what's the starting point? What's the default? Is the default show everything or hide everything? And then if it's show everything and people don't know that they can change it in settings, they might be frustrated. And if it's hide everything, people get frustrated because they can't find all of the complementary information if it's hidden in the settings. So there's always this fine line of adjustment of giving people options, but keeping it simple enough that it's ready to use out of the box.
I think the word simplicity gets overused there. I mean, I watch these arguments go round and round, and it's driven by sort of us in our user, our consumers' hat of just being damn lazy. So it's I can't. Oh, it's too difficult to learn. And actually, we want these things, but we're not prepared to think. So what we really want to do is throw all the crap in a bucket and walk off to the pub. We're having just said that actually what I really need to do is I need to find the associations and the depth in all this stuff I've just collected. And those two just sort of don't go together. I mean, certainly multiple views rings a bell all the way back to NLS. And I think views are really powerful. And I think there's a slight false argument in the UX community perhaps about simplicity because it makes it easier to have nice and graceful things. And it's fine, So here, this very nice little Alessi bottle opener does one thing really well. It sits in the palm of your hand, and it's a nice thing, but it does one thing only. Yes. I don't think it's an easily squared circle. I do actually think you sort of need things like views. The reason stated. I mean, it's very nice, for instance, to have some kind of color hinting. And what Fred was showing me was so much highlighting. It was actually coloring the text of the words. For instance, for an association with an idea, a concept. That to me makes sense. I mean, I think it's useful. It's useful to be able to turn it on and off because I'd like to keep that mapping. I just don't want the visual noise of it all the time. But to be able to look at it, and perhaps also in the teacher-student area, it might be useful to sort of basically be able to, in a sense, foreground some of the things they've done. I'm less sure in other contexts really what it does for us. I mean, I think its most useful areas is in things like the concept map view or whatever it currently is being called in Author, which is familiar to me from things like freeform open spatial hypertext maps in Tinderbox. Where you set, or Scapple, where you set the map, and so you're in charge, which I think is what people find scary because they want an exploration space, and at the same time they want it to do everything instantly, and they want it to look pretty. And I think I've learned over the time, the moment it starts looking pretty, I'm doing it all wrong, because what I'm doing is I'm investing my time into producing a picture that no one else will ever see. And it's not helping, when what I should be doing is I should be looking at the task at hand often, which is the relationship between things. Because making a pretty picture is a whole different task. And I could do that in a sense on a different map if I need to, but trying to do the prettification while you're actually doing the analysis, I think gets you in a very mixed mode of working, which is where you see all the angst coming out in PKM tools.
Actually, I think that's why in Tinderbox over time I've shifted from using the map view to almost exclusively using the outline view.
I have the same heresy. The way I describe it to people is I do the map bit in my head. I sort of think in map terms, but for organization, data consistency, and because most of the tasks I do end up in some form of output, which builds off the underlying outline, which is the root storage structure in that particular app. I mean, if it was something else, maybe different. And also, unless you've got a sort of 60-inch screen with massively good resolution, having terribly, terribly rich maps is something that translates poorly from the beautiful mind palace onto the screen in front of you, especially if you're working on, say, on a 13-inch laptop.
So what kind of when would you need that coloration highlighting thing in inside documents? What would be real use case? I'm thinking compared to searching for over a corpus and getting a kind of a search
Mhm.
result list, and compared to uh,
For me-
is it kind of waypoints? How often do you actually just look for people inside a document?
Go ahead, Mark.
What I was thinking, I mean, my mind sort of flies to things sort of like work or quasi-work documents. So I might want to, there might be, say, two entities, two organizations, two companies or something. I might want to track things that relate to one or the other. Or, you know, how they intermixed, or I might want certain. It's almost entities. It will be they people, be they ideas, be they organizations or something. Which is why I don't think you want the thing on the whole time. It's one of it's a bit like you just turn on a you know, it is a. I don't like the word highlighter because I can't abide highlighting because I just can't read it. Once it's been highlighted, it's almost unreadable to me. So I'm one that's not. I don't draw over the books simply because I wouldn't be able to read them if I did. But I know it's a common style. But I think color hinting in terms of coloring up the text using the same color that's then used, say, as a margin color in concept map, is quite a nice and little elegant thing. For instance, it might be that you've got a concept map where you've got all these entities, and you sort of think you think you've found all the entities, so you've sort of resolved that problem, and then you sort of look at where they turn up in effectively your document, and you will probably find holes. You'll find too much in one place and nothing in another. So in that sense, I think it could be quite useful. I'm not sure it yields insight beyond that.
Do I get it right that you want something where you put a few things on a kind of a I call it highlighting list but it's not, it's some sort of it highlights in a way, but not general categories of things, not all people sort of, or all dates or all papers or
Well, if you work inside, if you take a pragmatic constraints-based view and say, well, probably we can get away with that 8 different colors and tell the difference without them all being too acidly strong or something, then in that sense, well, you've got 8 colors. There are 8 things you can color maximum for sake of argument. So it doesn't really matter what they are. You know, one might be a tiny thing, one might be a whole group of things. That's why I say sort of entities, because the more I think about it, I don't have a strong view as to what they are. What they represent to me is rather in this whole playing with spatial hypertext map type things, is that it's just a way of saying the blue bits are not the same as the red bits. I don't want it to do any more than that. Which means that I can do some shuffling around for, oh, wait a minute, my little island of blue bits has got a red bit in it. Why is that? You know, because that seems, it looks like I have forced out a discontinuity or something that I can investigate. That's where I think these simple affordances actually help. I think
would that be more useful than, let's say we're not coloring all people. Let's say we're reading future text and we're interested in a few specific viewpoints. Either maybe someone mentioning Frodo or Engelbart or someone. So we, how would that differ, or would it be more useful to highlight that continuously as you scroll by than compared to actually searching for Engelbart and Frodo?
Well, very quick to answer, and I see Peter's got his hand up. Well, to me, when Freud first showed me the sort of colouring, what he showed me was some text. Well, he was mocking it up to web, but I understood what he was doing. So basically, in his concept map, he took some of those pill things at the top, whatever they are, these little objects, data objects, coloured some of them, and then said, okay, well, but you know, if we then laid that back into the text, where do these coloured entities turn up? And because it's done on the text rather than highlighting, it wasn't, and actually he used a quite muted tint to the color. It wasn't horrifically eye-searingly sort of contrasty, but so you definitely, almost you could see that the color just gave you a hint that some of the things you were looking for. So whether it's different to doing the find, I don't know. I think it's an alternate way. But whilst we noodle on that, Peter, do you want to take over?
Yeah, I've noticed that lots of projects choose to color code on entity types, and I would rather color code on relationships among entities. So if a paragraph is raising a critique of something, I'd like it to be in one shade. If the paragraph was a description of an example that was being applied, maybe have that in a different tone so that I could see the functional purpose of the paragraphs coded as opposed to what kinds of things are being talked about in the paragraphs. I think it'd be a lot more useful that way.
Raphael?
Yes, when I think about all of these things that are interactive with the text, I always tend to think of ways of complementing what I'm reading. So if I'm reading a paragraph and it mentions someone, I would love to just be able to touch that person's name and see, you know, a photo of that person or that person's full name or where they're from, like a very quick little blurb of biography, so that I can create a deeper connection with the people that I'm reading about. That's one way. Another way would be if it's in a location, if it tells me the name of a city in a country somewhere that I've never been, I don't know where it is. I would love to just touch that and the little rectangle comes up with the location of where it's at. You know, it may be a photo or a Google Maps kind of view. So those ways of enhancing the text that I'm reading, for me, is very important. So maybe if I touch on a date, it brings up a little sidebar with, you know, a timeline of all of the dates. If it's a historical text that is going through a period, you know, how would that be like? So I can get an overview of the, you know, where in time does these things happen? You know, maybe it's from 1500s to 1600s, and the book keeps jumping here and there, and it kind of, you know, restructures in a linear fashion. I don't know, but all of these different ways that enhance the reading experience for me is very valuable, especially when it comes to places, things, people's, you know, location, all of these things. I would love to see more about it, even if it's just, you know, connecting to Wikipedia whenever there is an entrance for that thing. That would already, you know, save some time of opening different tabs to get more information about that. That's how I would think about, you know, digital books being truly digital books, enhanced, connected to the web, to the network, or whatever.
Mark, you got your hand up.
Yeah. It was prompted by just a thought listening to Peter Saad-Dina talk about the relationships, and that again implicitly says to me, in a sense, again, in a way, we're talking about views. And I should, if for Peter's benefit, if not anybody else, I mean, when I use the word entity, I was using a very small e. I wasn't thinking any sort of technical or taxonomic or programming term. I was just thinking things that are not like other things, to put it in its loosest. You know, it's not, the term doesn't carry any weight when I mention that. But I really like this idea. So yeah, you might want to. If your piece is argumentation, if you're writing a professional opinion, or you're drafting a contract or a national treaty, or something where you need to understand these interrelationships of the parties, then that sort of thing is remarkably good. But I think it reinforces the notion that what you don't want to do is to turn it into my first desktop publishing set, and suddenly everything's colored and you can't tell which is what. I think it's something that, and it goes back to where I joined the conversation, which is, I know we don't really want to make an effort, but sometimes we should. I think it's a really powerful thing to have. I think it needs to be used sparingly, and it's something you probably want to turn on and off. If it's something you just sort of basically spray on the top, turn on and leave there, I'm less convinced of its long-term benefit. If it's something you use as a deliberate thing, either to mark up different things, or as powerfully as Piers rightly brought out, the relationships, the edges between the nodes and the networks, as it were. I think that's really useful. And one other quick segue, but prompted by something Raphael said, and the sort of thing I've been writing for Freud about, which came out of thinking about the fact of anything we write that isn't a formal linear novel or a sort of engine startup manual that has to be stepwise, that these days it's going to be remediated in some form, whether we want it or not. And sometimes just for an alternate narrative, sometimes just because we need bits in it. And it does occur to me that, actually having tools that let us seed some of the things we're talking about into the document, so that you could go in and pull out this strand or that strand, whether it's an argumentation chain or whether it's all the objects in it. And that actually chimes in a way to me with what Raphael was saying about knowing a little bit more. I mean, there's a special place in hell, I think, for people who write history books like novels, where it's now all multi-threaded narrative and you can't tell which is what. And you just want to know where this place they keep talking about is, because it's not on the map this big that they put inside the front page.
Yeah. I keep thinking of, just Lord of the Rings, it's such a deep lore of so many different places and connections and terms and things that, it is a history lesson of, what is this universe that I'm going in? And, as I read, I want to go deeper and deeper, but I know, of course, the book is structured in a way that if you've read The Hobbit, you're going to understand a little bit more of, the Fellowship of the Ring. If you've read the Fellowship of the Ring, you're going to understand a little bit more of Silmarillion. So, there's all these books of different ideas that you learn as you read, but sometimes you just need a paragraph from another book that complements what you're reading at that specific moment. And I don't think it's something that is done automatically, but I love the concept of curation. There's so many specialists on Lord of the Rings that if they had, means of enhancing content, there are those annotated versions of books, but that's one specific point of view from one person, from one publisher, and we have things like Hypothesis that, you can annotate websites, but I don't know where I want to get at, but I want to just combine all of these things so that we can choose to see this enhanced version if we so choose to.
That touched. You both touched upon something here that I thought of as well. Regarding who puts those annotations in there and those highlights, is it the author? Is it after the fact, after publication by some experts or interested parties, or is it by you, or maybe even by your software in automatically? So there are many different people or machines, systems that can put those things in there, and to which degree you want the author to put them in there, and to which degree they should be shown as well. A bit similar to how much links you want to see on a web page. Sometimes it's too much, but sometimes it's too little nowadays, where nothing is linked anymore because they don't want to send you to other people, to other sites. So I don't really have an answer here, but it's interesting to see where, because to me the interfaces differs a bit if it's viewing the author's intended presentation, if it's layers from other interested parties, or if it's your similar to how Mark described, that you want to follow two different entities, two organizations that you've selected yourself, and you don't want to see all organizations, you don't want all people to be highlighted. So that's quite a different mode when you're, and then you may want to hide the author's highlights and make it as plain as possible to make your thing stand out. And also the degree of automation involved in here. because it's often falls back to the machine to actually do that coloration by some magic that I can't see. Because when I looked at the future of the text and look at those pages, the problems of automatic highlighting is immediately clear to me, because in one sentence you see Engelbart as a person, mentioned as a person, and in the next paragraph you have a referenced paper by Engelbart next to a date or a year, 1960 something, maybe, and those dates may not be relevant for the timeline, for example. Published, it's not so much an event, but it's a publication that is quite different in character to different historical events. Of course, it could be put there, but it's not natural to put it in there always, I think. So we have to then clarify what can be done by machines, what should be done by machines, and some things are easy, like the Kindle. When you click on a character, you can see previous mentions of that character, and I think that is very useful for a novel, because I see a name that I know I've read before, but have no clue who that person is, and just getting reminded that was a friend from 20 pages ago is fantastic and a very good thing for me. So, and that can be done automatically by with no problems almost. So yeah, different threads.
Because I'll throw in three things. One is I was thinking of prompted by Raphael saying of wanting more information. One of the things is actually scoping it, because it's all very well to throw up in your mind's eye you want a little bit more and you get a nice snippet from Wikipedia and you carry on reading. In reality, 2 hours later you're at the far outside of Wikipedia reading about subject. So unless you're very self-disciplined or have some real work pressure, actually, we overlook the fact that the system can't necessarily tell with a fidelity that we like to think what it is we want to know when we said we wanted a little bit more. That's actually quite nuanced in our mind's eye. So it's a concept and a thing to follow through. I think it's actually quite difficult in execution for that reason. And again, until probably our algorithmic systems have a better understanding of the structure of written language, which they don't really yet, and they don't deal well with omissions and elision, things that are sort of you have to infer from the reading and the context. One other thing that sort of plays into all this is sort of I think sort of work modes. It's the fact that I constantly find myself reflecting that a lot of stuff happens in the middle ground between what might want to call it self-literature and stuff that is very, very sort of structured technical writing, or in various professions where there is a very fixed format. Most of it's happened in the middle ground, but I made the mistake once of saying, well, so there is no narrative here, which caused some sort of literary criticism person to just go blow their mind. They couldn't conceive of even writing a to-do list that didn't have a narrative, and I think that's massively over-egged because it's just appropriation of the work of the context. In reality, a lot of our writing isn't storytelling, or it may need a linear thread, but to call it storytelling, I think, is misleading to ourselves in the understanding of what we're trying to do. And it's pertinent to discussion here when we're saying, well, so why do I want to color up? Why do I want to make these things more visible? Because a lot of it is sense making, both to ourselves in writing it and ourselves as readers, be it of our own work or other people's. And the last was something to do with, I've written down context, but it was something I was saying, but it's now passed completely from my, so I'll shut up and let Peter speak.
Okay, I was thinking that since we only have 8 effective colors that we can make use of and discern at a time, what I'd really like to have would be a DSL for describing visualizations and highlighting patterns in the text with some visual affordances in way of an inverse parser to help me construct appropriate expressions within that DSL. So I want to be able to say, for instance, show me references to universities hosting projects related to text visualization, highlighted in purple. And then have the system go through and generate an appropriate query on the text document and apply the highlighting based on that.
There is, I understand. I mean, I understand. What I see in that is, of course, the sort of iceberg part of that is the amount of data and the structure and clarity needed in the sort of data informing the DSL is absolutely massive. So the color bit is almost a froth on the top, because after you've worked out what the entities are, then you can construct the nice query. So there's an interesting part to it. If we take that as a given, again, it goes back to the thing of views. So rather than the sense of one saying, well, we'll have a sort of color view or something. I think that's the wrong way to think of it. It's right. You know, there are different ways. I want a mechanism where I can represent this. I can represent a skein of association that I have worked out, or I'm still working out, and I'd like to play. I would like it, in a sense, painted across the top of, say, in author sense, one of the views, either the concept map, the concept view, whatever it is, or the text itself. So there's this, you know, it becomes multiple views, because the view is, in a sense, is changed by what you, the person driving the application, want those colors to represent. So
another kind of interaction that comes to mind. There were some episodes in Star Trek: The Next Generation when they were effectively doing database queries, and they'd be having a dialogue with the computer, and Geordi would be asking a computer about instances of whatever, and thinking, there are 2,364 items. And then he'd say, well, can we limit that to such a, okay, now there are 976. All right, well, cross-reference that with, there are now 253. Okay, we're getting somewhere. Did any of those involve warp nacelle overheating? Now we're down to 16. Okay, can you list those on the screen? You know, that kind of winnowing it down through an iterative process seemed very plausible and psychologically realistic.
Yes, and I assume you mean in terms of, sorry, before, but I assume you mean there you're talking about effectively what you might think of as a sort of finished text with a fair amount of annotation in terms of the DSL that's provided by the author or by other people.
Yeah,
that gets you to the gate point where you can say, right, I now will play tunes across it. Anyway, sorry, I should let speak.
No problem. I have loud younger generations here screaming happy, and it was good. But still, when I think of this, I wonder if in a way, even though this could be useful, is it even on that? I want to ground this a bit. Is this even on a top 10 list for what the pain points or what we really want to have in text? It's so easy to get when you show colored things. Everyone wants colored things. I also want colored things, but do I really want them? Do I really want? Because when I think about it, it's not even on my top 10 list. Even though I can see the value, and I can see, especially when people have to sift through enormous amounts of text to speed that scanning process up a bit. But for ordinary use cases, there are so many things that I would rather have. I would rather have the computer to remember my deleted text. I would rather have a way to write notes everywhere. I would rather have ways of promoting or highlighting my best thinking. I would rather have good questions that I can ask myself when I'm reading, because I forget all my good questions. I write them down, and I have some fantastic questions stolen from people that I really want to remind myself of when I read. So there are so many things I would rather have that is not on the surface level of text, because it's so easy to get carried away and talk about kind of the hyperactive things we do with text, jumping to the next thing, searching through, surfing webs and jumping to the next thing, but not actually the deep reading that I think provides enormous amounts of value and is the desperate thing that is desperately needed. It goes back to what you're saying about Mark, doing the hard work or doing the work. It's more. It may not even be hard, but it has to be focused work. So I want more support for doing focused work, because that is what I miss the most.
Very quickly, just to answer your point, the reason this the color thing came in the conversation, if I recall, was without sort of heading too far down that track, was simply that Fred was saying, look, it's just something we could do, you know, in the time scale of Vince's presentation or the next FOT book, whatever it is, and possibly using author. In other words, could we do something with author that would just, you know, do something? And sort of color seemed there. I think at the time, Fred was thinking of things like, well, could we do that? Maybe use a bit of NLP. But I'm being a British English writer, and I you know, my writing in the habit of British English is defined by all the rules it breaks. So probably if I was writing in German, maybe, but I don't think that just finding every instance of some word and saying this absolutely inherently means this, I don't buy that. I just see too much too much writing pass before my eyes that completely defies such sort of simplicity. Anyway, so that's what started it. I think the interesting thing that does come out of it is that whether or not it's taken further, that the possibility of being able to highlight something or select something you've defined effectively, it's got in author it will run off what Freud's calling concepts, but let's say with a very small c. So things that you have decided are a thing, you can color a number of them, and then that color could possibly be seen both in the concept map and possibly as a sort of maybe as a you know, a non-searing tint of the color in the body text. But it's probably something, certainly in the body text, you don't want to toggle on and off. And I think that's as far as it goes. I don't think it was offered as a counter to all the things you're saying, which is where I'd agree. I mean, I think it's the sense making, and actually it is the capture of the entities and relationships where we're woefully underserved at the moment. We're drowning in facts and data. What we don't have are tools that I think make it as easy for us to do that. You know, witness the fact, you know, Raphael's good point about it. So I'm reading this history book. But wait a minute, didn't last chapter when you were writing about the other lots, was this before then? Was it after then? Well, and whereabouts in the place that we're talking about did it happen? And all this sort of thing. And the means for doing that are very, very, I think, immature at the moment. Put my hand down.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And still, I think it even more missing or more needed is not, because in a way that is kind of a data as well, that is not just encoded, that the author knows of, or someone else after the fact, maybe a team that annotates documents after it's published. They provide the data that is missing currently, but still even more important, I think, is the kind of the curation, another kind of curation where you really say that if you only read one thing from this book, read these few pages. It doesn't say. It doesn't have any more data than that, really. It's just saying that this is really important. And that point is really
like a thesis in that sense, because even if there's one thing, it doesn't necessarily devalue the book, because in a sense, if all the book does is provide the scaffolding to make the point that you will then well, what you may not agree with, but at least you will accept as a point, that sits atop all of this, then that's not a bad thing.
No, and still, or still, it sounds. And it is this kind of curation from the author, from other people that is we don't have even less means for doing that unless you do it in plain text and by literary references, that you read a text where it says, it can't really point into it or link to it because we don't have the facilities for linking deep into the text or linking into between the sentences even.
I think the powerful thing of these sort of mapping type things is, I think I think my observation, having worked alongside a tool for about 15 years now, that's had this from the sort of get-go, and people turn up there basically at the door of this after they've tried lots of other things and got frustrated. They get frustrated with this as well. But the thing about the map is, where it helps is that we have a tendency, again, it's probably our natural human laziness, that we want things so we can be done. So let's define all the definable things and we'll feel better. We won't be any the wiser, but we'll have lots more things and they'll all be nicely defined. And we tend to conflate that well-intentioned work, or we misvalue it. And it's not that it is without value. It's not a binary thing. It's just but is it moving us down the trajectory we're trying to go? If we're trying to understand things, just having more things to understand has not necessarily actually helped us in that.
No, because what we want is often we want some sort of recommendations and not search results. And we always think of search results, and you don't want 100 books to read, you want a few books to read, or one book to read to start with at least. And same for search results. We think that if I search for it and see the name 100 times in a document, it's not in a particular order. It should be ordered in terms of relevance, and that is usually, the computer usually can't do that because it needs the human in the loop here to actually find that for you.
Modern manners dictates that when we don't say anything rude about the technology, which is not, I think, anyone's intent, but it does sort of create this over reverence for things just because it was done by a computer. And I'm sure we've been through loops before with steam trains and ships and whatever. So I think as a race we've sort of been there before, and so this sort of fascination with software is just the current loop of it. But that's why I worry when we start basically doing something that makes it easier to. Anything that makes it easier to fill a bucket begins to worry me. Because I've come to realize that's the point where I stop concentrating, because I should care what's going into the bucket, not that the bucket is being filled.
No, and even if you fill the buckets with good wine, after a while you have too much wine. It's best to drink a few glasses of wine, not have buckets of a good wine.
So the power, to me, the power of thinking back to the initial visualizations you did. So what we would, in a way, what we were sort of seeing you do with that was actually rather akin to Peter's point about the sort of Star Trek query. As you begin to feed something into it, things just gently fall away. They don't disappear. They're still there, because if nothing else, you may need to pivot sort of midway through what you might call a query, because you now realize that you're actually pushing down the wrong thing. And it's not so much backing up, it's so an interesting thing where you have this sort of fading metaphor is that it's a bit like so you went into the library, you looked up a subject, you get there, and then you find there are only 2 books in that section. You're thinking, well, that's not what I was expecting. So have I come to the wrong section? Did I ask what did it? And not all too often is that. Well, you didn't ask the wrong question. You just didn't ask the right one. Because the system's sort of hard edged. It again, the recommender failed because it lacked knowledge to draw the association that you had in here. And in the same way, you were unable to articulate it in a method it could understand. So that's why I find the fading in, fading out aspect of looking at stuff really quite interesting, because it avoids this thing where you type something into Google and it comes back, yes, the answer is 42. It might be.
And the fading of the colors, I think they make much more sense in a kind of the overview, the timelines and other things, because then there you don't have an authored document that you're breaking the flow of. You don't have any natural sense that is put into it. You have to make that sense, and if you color a word in a sentence, in a way you break or change that sentence by doing that. You change the emphasis of that sentence, but so it could break or muddy or hide what the author intended to say with that sentence. But if you have a long lists or the timelines or other kind of graphical views, it could bring out the sense that wasn't there from the beginning. Highlighting all the social media documents of the hypertext conference, or highlight everything that speaks about typography or spatial hypertext or a particular topic. Of course, you still need to do some groundwork to actually get some sort of categorization, but I think it makes way more sense to do it there than to do it inside the text.
Well, that's an interesting thing. I mean, this, it's where and who does the categorization. I mean, something that struck me when I was doing my work for my thesis on and looking at Wikipedia, what was sort of clear was, despite it was supposed to be about not ownership, it was actually all about ownership. So that you don't even think about categorizing my stuff. So you see all these turf wars going off because, effectively two categories had decided they own this thing, and people, arguing backwards and forwards to no effect, because it didn't change the price of fish at all, about that, when it can belong to both, which sort of spoke to me, saying, right, this is people fundamentally misunderstanding what the categorization is really trying to help with. It's trying to, it's not about asserting ownership, that are we in this country or that country. It's more the relationship thing. So it says to me that there are probably people who understand that better than the people who are doing it at the moment. And I think what's interesting, one of the things, I think back to very early days when Freud first showed me Author, and this was before really the concept map thing had sort of come in. And we were talking about this in, well, how do you sort of deconstruct the parts of the story, narrative, document, contract, whatever? How do you avoid premature formalization? In other words, I've got to write this story. It's rubbish, but that's the story I started writing, so I'm now obliged to finish it. Well, no. I mean, often we're obliged because we have nowhere backing up. We have nothing short of a do-over, and that's because we forced a structure on ourselves too early, before we knew what the structure was. So we have an idea of where we're going. I think it's challenging because I don't think it's something we're particularly taught to do. I think in most Western schooling, and I think I suppose the first time I sort of recall having a sense of it was actually back when I was in the services, and it was the kind of thing is, look, what you understand is you may not know how you're going to get to the objective. What you need to understand is you are going to get there. And if you focus on that and stop worrying about, how much effort you put into thing you just had to tear off and you had to leave and go, you'll find it a lot easier. And it's something I've hung on to. But that's not an approach that we're sort of told to go methodically. And what's happened is our good intent of saying you should build off provenance. You should find, you should cite things that are said to be accepted as fact and this sort of thing, which unintentionally leads you down the path of, well, if I collect enough things and I put them in the right order, I get magic at the end, or I get to say my thing at the very end. And that's not what's intended, but that's sort of what happens, because what I see now is people are massively over concentrated on the collecting of the things and the organization of the things. And the remembrance that you actually did all this, you know, with an intent to have something at the end, is almost forgotten.
But how do we counteract that with our approaches and systems and tools? How do we have similar to how I want tools that are dumber in some senses, or it helps me focus on things and not getting out on Wikipedia, and how the Kindle keeps me on the Kindle because it's so bad in many ways. And
well, part of it maybe is you want, and this sort of seems counterintuitive, is you actually want to introduce just the right amount of friction, whereby you don't go too fast. So you think about, you know, well, why am I putting this place? Why is this a green thing and not a blue thing, or is it an orange thing? And at the same time, it doesn't really matter. The thing that matters is not whether it's blue or orange or green or red. It matters why it's not blue. It's almost the counterfactual. You're thinking about how this relates. So things like the concept map view in Author, and you know, other similar sort of spatial sort of thinking spaces, for want of a better word, by which I personally exclude force-directed graphs, which are a bit voguish at the moment. And that's mainly because they became terribly popular doing social network analysis. And now there are lots of Me Too tools basically all doing the same thing with a slightly different UI. And that's not really helping us, because we're not trying, in the sort of work we just mentioned, we're not trying to analyze a known network. We're trying to analyze an unknown and as yet unformed network. And so that's where things like force-directed graphs don't help at all, because they almost give you a certainty that doesn't in fact exist at all. So much more valuable visualization helps. And I love, actually, the more I think about it, the more I like this idea of being able to sort of dial things in and out of prominence, because I don't want to forget they're there. You know, otherwise you get there, you finish mending the watch, you close up the back, and oh, there are 4 pieces left over. And that, you know, is wrong, because it might work now, but it probably won't keep working. So in a sense, if you're doing that with your thing that you're writing, I mean, there's some left over will be deliberate, you know, extra research material, but in a sense, the things you meant to put in there, if you get to the end and you haven't used them, well, you probably missed something in your plan. And it may be you then decide that, okay, that's cool. I'm happy with that. But again, it's this ability to see these things that's terribly hard if you're basically just writing linear text. And the other thing that I just wonder is how you capture or you begin to capture the sort of metadata, for want of a better word. It's a bit too technical in this context, but there's this extra skein of information that would begin to feed the sort of richer, you know, querying that Peter was referring to, because someone's got to do it. It probably isn't going to be one person, and it's absolutely self-evident. Where is it in? This is the one. You know, it's actually got a machine index at the back and a human one. And I misspoke before, because in fact it's only got the very beginning of the machine because it's so long. And it basically has insufficient clarity. So it flags up the fact that the right sort of human skill is good there. So I can sort of see now we're effectively writing in digital, as you know, the documents are digitally native, and they'll be lucky if they ever make it to paper. It begs the question as to, you know, how early we want to linearize. Is it helpful? So
yeah, and that is why I've been toying with the idea of even if you're writing using kind of linear tools, to have many documents side by side that concerns the same project. I feel that is very useful to have many scratch pads and on different levels, the overview ideas, things that the checklists of what you must do, or ideas that should be in there, the ideas that may be in there, but
Yeah.
also the darlings that should be kept for another project that shouldn't be in there, but that you really need to cut out and put in a place.
Well, and a little
or
abattoir
else
and
they
a caller, where you take the ones that you've decided you're definitely going to kill, and you're not going back in. That's a one-way door, you know.
Yeah, those, but in a way, those are easier because they you can burn them. But your darlings, they are hard, and it's really mentally very good to put them in a place to know that they are still saved. They're not killed. They're just in foster care somewhere else in a document. So actually, to view documents as many paper scraps that you write on, and to do that digitally as well. Not it doesn't even have to be the map, but I like the map thing and the map views where you can put them wherever you like. But also just having many tabs on a document would be interesting.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, the fact that this thing about, if I'm thinking a lot recently about things being sort of too pretty, but it's a very fine line. There's a very fine line between it's all noisy and horrid looking, and I can't make sense of it, as opposed to, ooh, it looks so beautifully, it's too good to be true. So then you don't want something that looks like an infographic, because an infographic is an infographic. It's essentially a static piece, even if it's made of dynamic parts underneath, and it's carefully tuned to give a very particular picture, and that's not a bad thing at all. But if you've got something that's more complex, and especially if it's changing over time, I so much of what we do, and things are changing faster too. So if you work in any sort of organization, you'll be impacted by the laws of your land. You will have well, we have broadband now. 20 years ago, we had dial-up telephone. All these things change, and they actually have an impact. And we don't sort of, again, we don't really think about this in terms of how they change. So the point that we think on, especially things that work beyond a personal level. So if it's writing for an organization, say, or a field, a discipline, how do we get good at spotting the trigger points? We say, we need to go and reassess this thing because we now know something we didn't know before, or something that was impossible is now possible. And we know that we couldn't look at this thing before because it was impossible. This is no longer the case. Therefore, we should, now commit to doing this. That's potentially there, but it involves having this sort of skein of extra information. And I do wonder, I know there are things like hypothesis, but I have a worry bead that that isn't moving us away from effectively a form of sort of digital marginalia. So in other words, we write our comments, but then that comment then has still got to be parsed into actionable thought, hard-edged things that we can do something with. And it's not that the comment is without value. It's that it's got to probably be read by another human before it has any value. And that's where I think it has an inherent limitation in the current day and age. So we need to be clever about our annotation without it just becoming a bit of algorithmic scraping
which part is missing there? Is it kind of annotating the annotations so you can do something useful with them, or is it some sort of a system to collect those annotation and resurface them? It's kind of a similar thing, of course, but
well, I'll give you a case in point. That we've got the data set that we have for the ACM stuff. One of the things, well, you were asking about special hypertext paper, and the question is, well, what is and what isn't? You're certainly not going to tell that by just running a corpus search across it. Absolutely, you won't, because some of the things that are very pertinent really just aren't talking directly about the subject. they're informed by it, or they inform it, but they don't, it's not foregrounded in there, or it might not use the most obvious keywords. So it actually wants someone, and I was talking to Dave Millard, who's my PhD supervisor, one of my supervisors, and his friends at the moment. And I, I was surprised at how people immediately said, well, why didn't you do this? And I'm very happy to do it, but I don't think it should be just one person, because that's incredibly fragile. And I know that, and I'm cynical enough that I wasn't being invited to do it because I'm an expert. I was being cynical enough to do it because I might be stupid enough to just say yes. And that's the worry bead in it. So I'm thinking about having systems that just allow for the fact that, there's something needs doing. It might need to be done by multiple people, not necessarily collaborative at the same time, but so there's an editability that's needed. But it's this extra scale of information that allows your access.
It depends on what the end result is going to be. If it's going to be some sort of authoritative viewpoint from an organization, or if it's an entry point for a reader. For me, it would be relative to me, you're an expert on this data set, so just having you selecting 10 things that you know are, according to you, are about spatial hypertext, would still be useful, even if another expert in that field would select 5 different papers compared to yours, and add a few and remove a few ones to their data set, and just as long as I had the way of viewing your selection, and maybe perhaps even viewing their selection, I would be perfectly happy. I'm fully aware that I need the entry point rather than a finished
well, that's another really, you make a really interesting point there. And this is something, again, the 59 years of writing ATB reference have taught me, is that, people are constantly rocking up at the front door saying, rubbish, I can't find anything. They actually say it quite politely. And I always bridle slightly when I think, oh, not again. And then I realize that it's, from where they're sitting, it is emphatically true. And it might be vocabulary, it might just, there's some edge. It's basic, it is, but it boils down to, how do I get started? Because from where where this person is, it's not where I thought that it should be, and not because I have a fixed view, but I mean, you can't predict everything, but it's made me think a lot more about how you structure information that other people want to walk through, because whilst Wikipedia is a wonderful thing, it constantly leaves me sort of disappointed, because only because, of course, that if there were more people filling in the holes, it would be even better, but it's not. And so you suddenly hit these pockets of sort of heavy information, and there are big gaps between, which is misleading when you're at the point you just mentioned, where you're starting and you're just trying to get a handle on this thing. And you don't want all of it. You sort of want to understand what is it, and also often at the start is, why is this not that? Why is this a separate thing? And that's often hard to find, mostly because that's the one thing that the authors in this will think is self-evident, because obviously, they wouldn't be doing it. So that there is also this thing of whether you're writing or indeed classifying for someone who is anyone but yourself is quite an interesting and different challenge. But it's quite important, and if you're going to do anything that's going to be used at more than a personal level, I think it's sort of quite important. And again, I don't think our writing tools, and here I'm not talking about writing something like a novel, but I'm talking about sort of just writing to purpose in our general lives and work. And that's the thing I don't think our writing tools are sort of addressing yet, because I mean, effectively, if you take something like a Google document, it's totally remediated the whole time. It doesn't exist as a document. I mean, I think it is actually composed of the sum of its current edits. You can take a scrubber bar and run along a screen, and the document will change before your eyes. So it has no state. It was never designed. My understanding is it was never designed to have an end state. That's one thing mistake that sort of I think they've realised is there is no way, in a sense, to archive a cloud document. I mean, you can save a copy elsewhere and say this is the copy, but that's bending the rules slightly. So there isn't the sense that this is something that has a finite life span, and then it is a thing, or it has stages in there that the structure, either the tool or the repository it lives in, actually supports that. And again, our writing tools potentially could do it, but they don't. And we as the users of them are complicit. I don't blame the tools, and also not by inference. I'm not blaming the programmers who just built the tools that they either wanted to or were asked to. That's not the issue. It's that if I look at where we've got to with digital text, I think we're still doing far too much paper. I find it sort of ironic that
I'm back.
What did I miss? Everything and nothing.
Yeah, we had maybe a bit tangential but interesting topics here. So
Yeah.
maybe we should finish this up for the recording.
Mm-hmm.
Just to have some, or else everyone else will have to listen to this. And this is
No
quite
problem.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can stop the recording then.